I'm not going to go to the Christmas party. I would personally never be hesitant with that. Like I am different to you. Like that concept of, you know, I don't want to come across as being too different, but we are different and we should be proud of that and we should be open with it, like you were saying earlier.
They were like, oh, but like, can't you just sort of do it but not really say that you are? Like, can't you just say, yeah? And I'm like, no, I kind of, and they'd be like, oh, but you know, all religion, like they would try, like they'd make a very concerted effort to try and dissuade me from identifying as a Muslim and then also from practicing as a Muslim. And
you're really exposing everybody.
Yeah.
Gender boundaries.
When you do make for it, like when you do come in contact with the other gender, sometimes they just, especially if they don't know, if you don't put boundaries, they already, you know, without you knowing, they touch you or touch your arm or your face, and it's kind of hard to avoid that sometimes. You know, you can't just slap their hand away.
So where do you work at?
I find it difficult to openly disagree with non-Islamic practices and norms.
I'm a bit 50-50 on that one. I mean, you do your thing, I do my thing, and that's just how it goes really for me. You know, excel in your own area, believe in what you believe. I have what I think is my truth. You have what you think is your truth. You know, I think that's how I would take it.
Definitely, most countries nowadays have a freedom of religion, and you're free to practice your religion. You know, saying no to alcohol and all that is perfectly fine. You know, you don't have to fit in with the others just to, you know, be like one of them. I think it's important to still keep some of an Islamic aspect to yourself, even whilst living in a foreign country.
Well, I think it's interesting as well because now as society progresses, or I think every time it's taken a step forward, I believe it's taken 2 steps backwards as well. So it's now slowly we're chipping away at morality, and morality comes from the Latin word mos, right? Mos meaning one's disposition, which we in Arabic call what? Fitra, right? So slowly you're seeing the erosion of identity, right? And now we've become a culture, a society that celebrates more freedom, and we're slowly bleeding out, and that supersedes divine command. So we're pretty much divorced from teleology in that regard.
So I think for me, one situation that sticks out personally was a time where I was working, and it was during the Christmas period, and they have like Christmas parties, and so it's the standard to go to these parties and mingle and stuff like that. And so when the bosses and whatnot were coming up to me and were like, oh, are you coming? I said no, but then they know obviously I'm Muslim and all that, so they're like, look, you don't have to drink and this and that. I'm like, no, but you know, the environment, we're not meant to be there. So you're put in this awkward position where you have to explain yourself as much as possible, and then they think that it's not actually the reason, it's some other reason, but you're using your religion as an excuse to not go. Does that make sense? So I was put in that uncomfortable position, so it's like, makes it really hard for me to sort of, you know, disagree now, because
I feel like the practical part, like the explaining things sometimes gets a bit hard or a bit awkward, but in terms of like disagreeing, like I'm not going to go to the Christmas party. I would personally never be hesitant with that. Like I am different to you, like that concept of, you know, I don't want to come across as being too different, but we are different and we should be proud of that and we should be open with it.
Like I don't think it's about Christmas parties. I think this is about social issues that not just Muslims, I think every religious community.
What sort of things do you find out?
Well, any religious community that has like a pre-modern worldview would struggle with, and this is a broader society.
But that's where we should be tackling, because that's that concept of pre-modern, that's the issue. Because when I view my religion as pre-modern, it's almost saying that this is modern, this is more advanced, this is more, you know, suitable for our society, whereas in reality, Islam is the most suitable for every single society. So when I say issues in our society, however controversial they may be, LGBTQ, whether it's, you know, like all these sort of issues that come up and cause controversy, it's like, well, this is my opinion. And I'm proud to say that your opinion is wrong and mine follows Allah and His Rasul, sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
But I think the consequences are where the issue lies.
It's just like practical, like explaining, that gets a bit confusing, I guess.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, but I do think the explanation is an opportunity to teach others, especially non-Muslims, about our religion, because they mostly get their information on media, which is not the very best of, you know, sources. So when they do come to you, like they ask you, like, why aren't you drinking and all that, you know, I see that they ask more about the religion as well, and it gives me a chance to explain to them how it is, you know, and teach them, and I think that's a good opportunity.
Because of my name, I fear that I won't get a job.
I'm gonna leave mine down because I'm a bit of a 50-50. I was a bit of a, it took me 3 years to get my first job. I was playing when I was in my trials, and I didn't really want to sell myself out for that reason because my name is Mohammed Hisham Malik. It's a bit of a mouthful. It's a bit of a mouthful. So for the first year, I was applying with all my resumes. It was Mohammed Hisham Malik. And I didn't get any responses. I was just really like, oh, we're so sorry, we're so sorry. Second year, I said, okay, I'll give in a little bit. So I took Hisham off, so it became Mohammed Malik. And that was like there for 2 years. And I still didn't hear anything. I was like, okay, I'm not going to go for Anthony or whatever. I'm not going to go for any of that, or Mark. But I just kept it, but slowly, but surely, I got it. But it can be, because I'm from England, so the thing is, over here you have this, what's the word, Moe, right? I'm not a fan of that word. So when I first started school over here, oh, Moe Malik, this, that. I'm like, sorry, my friend, my name's Mohammed Malik, right?
Yeah. It's the name of the Prophet.
It's Muhammad. No, yeah, true, but obviously if they're non-Muslim, I was like, just basic respect. It's Mohammed Malik. In England we have Mo. Over here you have Moe. I'm a fan of neither.
You're a Muhammad, so.
I put no, not because I don't think it happens. I'm sure it happens to a lot of people. I haven't personally experienced it myself too much. I think most of the people I've worked with have been Arab or Muslim anyway. But not because I haven't experienced it, but because the question said, do you fee? And I don't know, I feel like if somebody doesn't want to hire me because of my name, I'd rather not work there. Right? You hear a lot of stories, like I heard a story in the UK where a couple of brothers applied for a job, they refused a handshake with a woman, and they got denied a job on that basis. And so they took him to court and made, I don't know how many £100,000. You end up, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you stick to your fundamentals and you stick to the deen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bless you in ways that you can't imagine. And I've heard a story of a brother who went and got a job, asked for a prayer space, and they sacked him. He went and filed a lawsuit and the whole company had to shut down because they had to pay him out, right? So I feel like it's something that does happen. I don't fear it. If it happens, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward me and bless me in other ways for sticking, rather than like changing my name or trying to somehow compromise it.
That should be like a new tactic for Muhammad to just,
try to sue them,
sue the company, make a lot of money, and move on to another company.
I'm waiting for it to happen to me. So
I think, essentially, at the end of the day, as you mentioned, and rightly so, is that if they're not going to hire you based on your name or who you are or all that, then why are you going to work for them? What's the point? So, alhamdulillah, at the same time, I also see a lot of, mashallah, successful, Muslims who are entrepreneurs or business owners or doctors and all that. And so I look to that for inspiration and be like, look, regardless, I know a lot of people have a lot of struggles in certain times being able to achieve what they wanted to achieve in a certain field. But, look at all these people. If they can do it, then I can do it. So I always derive inspiration from them as well.
I felt pressure from wider family to compromise my faith.
Yeah. I'm sure a lot of people have personally, alhamdulillah, like a good practicing family, but yeah.
Well, what about the...
Obviously, and as I said before, it's really important to make the point that it's not just my experience as someone who comes from a non-Muslim family. A lot of people who come from Muslim families have families that are, as Tanzim described, extended families and communities that are kind of hostile to practicing. Obviously, for me, when I first told my family about that I decided to become Muslim and I'd taken Shahada, they were like, oh, but can't you just sort of do it but not really say that you are? Can't you just say, yeah? And I'm like, no, I kind of, and they'd be like, oh, but all religion, they would try, they'd make a very concerted effort to try and dissuade me from identifying as a Muslim and then also from practicing as a Muslim. And I would sort of, like I said, I have a very good relationship with my family and I wouldn't say that that's any fault of theirs. It's more just
conception.
It's the conception about the world and the conception about religion. And for my mum, it was actually her fear that maybe one day if I identified as a Muslim, someone would come and attack me in the streets. She remembers very vividly the Cronulla riots. She's like, well, what if he's walking around in a turban one day and someone comes and hits him? So it wasn't necessarily out of that bad place of oh no, he's a religious person. Oh no, he's other, but it was more like that fear of oh, what's going to happen to him? What, is it going to make his life? Is he going to put a target on his head? But I certainly felt an immense amount of pressure. As to how you deal with that, it's really tough. I think having good relationships with your peers, Muslim peers, is very important. We all know in our deen the importance of company, good company. So yeah, having that kind of environment around where you have Muslims is incredibly important in terms of overcoming that hostility from family, extended family.
I find it difficult to socialize with non-Muslims.
Depends what kind of energy you have, really. If you're a really out there and outgoing person, you kind of connect with everybody, right? So that's what I'm like. I'm not really, because I wasn't brought up in you know, a co-ed school, with a lot of non-Muslims as well back home in England. It really wasn't a problem. It wasn't up until I came over here and had somewhat of the misfortune going to Hamish Ways. Stop with that in. But yeah, it was not a problem for me.
I'm surprised. So 3 of you said yes. That's a bit surprising. I mean, we live in a non-Muslim country, so how can you be troubled by that?
You want to go first? You go first.
Not in the sense that I can't hold a convo. Like I don't have an issue. Same like anyone that you speak to, you can get along. It's not an issue. But in terms of like, would I actively like? I find it more difficult because the sort of activities that you're going to go out and do. You know, you're going to go out with your friends. What sort of things? You know, topics of conversation are sometimes a little bit different. Habits. You know, stopping to pray is I find more difficult when you're around non-Muslims. And also I think just generally, like I grew up in this area, I went to Islamic school, I've generally always been around Muslim friends, non-Muslim acquaintances probably more than anything that I get along with and don't have an issue with, but it's a lot easier to have a good, strong, constant relationship with somebody who shares the same habits and I don't know, practices that you do.
I definitely feel that in the sense that, like, I guess with me, I did hang around with a lot of like non-Muslim friends when I was in high school and stuff, and I can get along with them fine. We have a lot of fun together, play sports and all that sort of stuff. But it's just down to when you're not doing that, when you're, I don't know, talking to them outside and stuff, it's never going to be about trying to improve your deen. I guess as a Muslim, that's what you want to become better at. And so when they fall into activities that aren't Islamically sort of sound at times, like, I don't know, it could be clubbing or, you know, dating or all that sort of stuff, it's like it's not going to help you because that's normal for them. You get what I mean? So that's why it's, at the end of the day, it's like if you have your own close Muslim group of friends that are trying to become better Muslims, it just becomes a lot more easier because you got a support network, whereas you don't really have that at times as a non. It can only go so far. They can be like, yeah, I'm, you know, nice to Muslims and I respect your beliefs and all that, but that's basically the ceiling of it. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So.
Even though the question was like socializing, I believe. Yeah. I actually don't think it's harder for me to socialize with anyone. I just talk to anyone. I don't care. I'll talk to a wall. I suppose it's about that, like the extent of that relationship. It can be quite difficult for me if that person doesn't understand the most fundamental thing about me, which is my iman and my belief. So that certainly makes it difficult to become very intertwined in the lives of non-Muslims.
For me, this is a bit of a grey area because I can make really good friends with non-Muslims, but I also really can't. I don't know how to explain it. I think it comes down to a bit of culture as well, because I've made a lot of friends with, you know, people of South Asian persuasion, because essentially our cultures are kind of similar, and even if they're not the same religion, if they're Hindus or Christians, they still believe in God and they still do some of the stuff that we do. And I can make friends with them.
Easier to understand and...
Yeah, but you know, when I went to uni, there was a lot of people of like non-Muslims, but like they were completely different people I've never met before. And I tried being friends with them, and although I got to a certain extent, it was quite hard because they, you know, sometimes they go above and beyond, and it just becomes hard to fit in.
I think we shouldn't be so tribal as well. Like, one of my best friends is Christian, and the reason is because I think his life is more moral than some of the Muslim circles that I know. So, you know, I think it's obviously up to people's experiences, but definitely, like, we shouldn't have this claim that you know, that non-Muslims are immoral and Muslims are moral, and my friends are Muslim, and therefore, you know, because they agree with our fundamentals, some Muslims, you know, don't.
You're really exposing everybody. Gender boundaries.
I'm going to say no, because regardless of how comfortable and how well you do it as an individual, our society is just so mixed that you can't avoid it. Does that make sense? Yeah. Like, it's not that I personally find it hard, it's just that in our social settings, in uni, in work, and whatever it is, you just can't avoid it.
Yeah, I don't really know. I didn't actually put anything up because I don't know how to begin to dissect that from my own experience. I suppose, in my family, it's obviously something that I grew up with that was very relaxed. You don't have the idea of gender segregation. I mean, naturally, if you're at like a family gathering or a barbecue, whatever, the guys will talk to each other and the women will talk to each other. That's across most cultures, I think. But obviously, that was one of the main things, kind of culture shock for me coming into Islam, is like the division between the genders, because I never experienced that before. And there were people who, they wouldn't speak at all to the opposite gender, and I was like quite surprised by that at first. I was like, wow, that's strange. So I don't know exactly how to say I navigated or how others navigated. I think it's very complicated, like you said, in this society and in this day and age in particular.
I think most of us are even like, we almost end up with confusion over what are you even allowed and not allowed to do as a Muslim. It's not very clear. Some things are very obvious, but like just day-to-day interactions, often we get like, what am I allowed to do? What am I not allowed to do?
And even at work, like sometimes you're in that sort of environment, you spend so much time and you have to like end up being somewhat friends, you know what I mean? Because like how can you operate? You're just like some dude that's just like closed off, weird, mysterious, closed off guy.
I don't know, sometimes, when you do make when you do come in contact with the other gender, sometimes they just, especially if they don't know, if you don't put boundaries, they already, without you knowing, they touch you or touch your arm or your face. And it's kind of hard to avoid that sometimes. You can't just slap their hand away.
So where do you work at? Sorry.
No, at school and all that, So you have to
just dive out of the way. Yeah.
I don't know, like.
It gets really awkward sometimes. Like
some people are a bit handsy, but
sorry.
But yeah, so you have to set up boundaries early on, in which I did. Don't worry.
I'm not going to question anything, don't worry, man.
But yeah, I'm just trying to say it can be difficult, especially with the handshake thing. That can get super awkward, and even like with high fives, they go, "Oh, high five," and you're just like,
"Well, look,
how about an air five? That's the best I can do."
I think the touching thing is one thing, right? But I think the bigger problem is like a touch. Like if you shake someone's hand, that's a single moment. But when you're at work with someone 8 hours a day, you develop a friendship, a relationship. This is my work buddy. You spend more time with them than you do with your family, like even with your wife or something in some cases. That's where you end up with an issue, which is like, how close am I getting to this person? Because the issue is not just the physical boundary, it's also an emotional sort of, or like you can't have that sort of relationship with somebody.
I think Dr. Jonathan Brown actually recently mentioned that they're having to discuss segregated workplaces in parts of the States, because of issues of like complaints about harassment or complaints about, like a woman would claim that she was harassed and then the man would say, well, no, that didn't happen, you're making it up. And so to just to do away with all of that, they're like, you know what, we're going to segregate it. And that's had to come into a conversation.
I heard a beautiful quote, which is like, for a functional society, the best way to achieve it is mixing between ages and splitting between genders, whereas our society has the opposite. And Islam promotes, when you mix between ages, the old and the young, the elderly are motivated by the young, and you're motivated to provide more for the future generation, and the young learn from the wisdom. We get the opposite, where we get so much like corruption that happens because we're mixing between genders, and then we don't appreciate.
If you really enjoyed this video, please support us by clicking on the links below. Give us a small contribution, it will go a long way, inshallah. Visit our website, www.onepathnetwork.com. Jazakallahu khairan.